LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the February 26th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I picked out the weekend's 18 best, most newsworthy clips for what should be a really educational, fair use media criticism and political analysis show for you all tonight. As usual, my clips come mostly from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. If you want to follow along with my clip list of the 18 clips and one still image I'm using during the show, there's a link down in the video description to this list of notes. I think someone's using a wood chipper next door. Sorry about that. If you can hear it, it's hopefully not too loud. But it's been a bad day for background noise. I'm covering three topics on what's going on in the corporate media news landscape, and also have several clips from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher last Friday, one of which is actually a newsmaking clip on whether there should be an independent investigation into the Trump-Russian connection. That's actually going to be the second topic I cover. The third topic will be Trump versus the media. That's continuing. But to have a little bit more of an optimistic look at what's going on in the world of Trump, that seems to be the news world is the world of Trump. I'm going to start with resistance to Trump as the first topic. And I'm going to start with a little bit of... first I'm going to start with a joke from Bill Maher's monologue last Friday, sort of talking about how Steve Bannon is trying to take apart the government. He talks about Steve Bannon talking at CPAC this week, although he calls it Steve Pack, and then he starts off his first joke, of course, is not getting Steve Bannon's title right, and then you'll see how it sort of morphs into a discussion of the resistance to Trump, which I will discuss after we watch that clip together over here.
But the scariest thing at Steve Pack was President Steve Bannon saying, no, he threw open all the cards. He said Trump's cabinet was selected for a reason, and that is the deconstruction of the administrative state. Wow. I'm not sure the word for that is conservative. I think it's terrorist. I mean, he is openly bragging about putting people like Rick Perry, Betsy DeVos, Scott Pruitt into office because they're idiots who will destroy the places they were put there to oversee. You can't impeach a guy for my plan is to wreck everything. What if you tried this at Quiznos? I intend to spit in the sandwiches, steal all the money from the register, and burn the place down. What do you think? I mean, This week, they discovered 7 Earth-sized planets that could potentially harbor life out there. I think NASA leaked this to get aliens to invade us. I do.
So I don't think that the resistance to Trump is actually going to be an alien invasion that is being worked up by NASA or leaked by NASA. The whole thing about the 7 planets, of course, was not leaked by NASA, though there will be a lot more about leaks later in the show when it comes to the whole Russia situation and also the press. But like I said, I want to start with this topic of the resistance, which, I don't know, was a little bit related to those monologue jokes, so some of which I thought were funny. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. I notice I already have almost 100 live viewers, even though I started almost on time for once, so thanks for showing up on time. I wish I started on time more often for you all. And the next clip I want to show is one of 3 news reports on the Democrats electing Tom Perez over Keith Ellison, and then Tom Perez immediately, as head of the Democratic National Committee, basically head of the Democratic Party going forward to try to fight Trump. This is the person who's supposed to be responsible for bringing back the Democratic Party from their big 2016 loss, and I'm going to show you how NBC reported on it, and then Fox News, and then CNN. I think NBC had the longest report and gave the most background, and I'll talk about it a little more with you after we watch that. It's actually only 70 seconds long. The Fox News report is longer but more biased, and then the CNN report is shortest, and goes sort of the other way as Fox News, as I will discuss with you after we first watch the NBC report from this morning here.
Democrats are now simply calling for all-out resistance to everything that President Trump touches.
We are going to dump Trump. Dump Trump.
As long as the president continues down this path, there is nothing Democrats can work with him on.
Let resistance plus persistence equal progress for our party and our country.
So that was the backdrop to yesterday's election of former Labor Secretary Tom Perez as chairman of the Democratic National Committee. Perez defeated the more progressive Representative Keith Ellison of Minnesota in a close race that was also closely watched. Many Ellison supporters made their displeasure clear when Donna Brazile, the outgoing chair, announced the results. Little did they know that Tom Perez was about to announce that Keith Ellison was going to be his deputy chair. Now, with the Democrats in their weakest position in almost 100 years, Perez's first job will be to unite the moderate and liberal wings of the party and then try to lead them out of the wilderness. Mr. Perez joins me.
And I'm going to have a few clips from Tom Perez. He did a couple different shows, and I wanted to cover that. But like I said, I want to compare a few different news reports. That was the NBC report, and I thought it was, fair and Sandy's interrupting me there, but that it was kind of classically fair and balanced, not the Fox News type of fair and balanced, which means giving just like one side, where they talked about some of the weaknesses in the Democratic Party, even in just that short 70 seconds. They talked about the split and then the unification. In this Fox News story, you'll see that they play up the split a little more. They also play up the need for the Democrats to go after, Fox News viewers, like the non-college educated white males. And I noticed there's a use of the word apparently in this clip, which I won't tell you exactly what it is modifying, but it's actually the same fact has the adjective clearly instead of apparently in the CNN clip I'll show afterwards to compare them. So watch for the word apparently over in this Fox News clip with Chris Wallace this morning, turning it over to their reporter Jonathan Serrie here.
Picked a new chair to rebuild their party and mobilize opposition to the president. They elected former Obama Labor Secretary Tom Perez head of the Democratic National Committee. Fox News correspondent Jonathan Serrie has the latest now from Atlanta.
Mr. Perez, congratulations.
With a new chairman, the Democratic National Committee hopes to rebuild the party with a 50-state strategy.
Because if we want to take back the House of Representatives, we got to take back state houses. Right. We got to take back governor's mansions. And we also have to make sure that we're working together on the issue of internal culture change.
So help me God.
Tom Perez, a former Obama Labor Secretary, nominated his closest competitor, Minnesota Congressman and early Bernie Sanders supporter Keith Ellison, as deputy chair in an apparent effort to unify the party's establishment and progressive wings.
If they trust me, they need to come on and trust Tom Perez as well.
Democrats say they also want to listen to another voting bloc that left the party in large numbers to support Donald Trump.
We've got to focus on working class Americans, particularly working white Americans. We've got to take an economic message to them to let them know that Democrats can create good paying jobs in America again.
We can't be bowling alone. We've got to be in partnership. The union movement is under attack. Planned Parenthood is under attack. And the Democratic Party will always be there to defend our friends.
Democratic strategists say they can take lessons from Republicans when it comes to recruiting candidates and messaging. They say it's not enough to complain about President Trump. They have to talk about their own values and vision for America's future. Chris?
Jonathan Serrie reporting from Atlanta. Jonathan, thanks for that. The president weighed in early this morning with this tweet. The race for DNC chairman was, of course, totally rigged. Bernie's guy, like Bernie himself, never had a chance. Clinton demanded Perez. Joining me now from New Hampshire.
So, I don't know. That seemed like a much more biased report. They ended with Donald Trump's tweet, which they never really rebut in any way. And later I'll show you Tom Perez and his reaction to that tweet. But first I want to show you the CNN story covering the same news that you just saw from Fox News and from NBC. And you noticed in the Fox News story they said that it was apparent unity, the appointment of Keith Ellison as the deputy by Tom Perez when he won. That was a show of apparent unity. And here in the CNN report, you see it's a clear show of unity. So you tell me, what do you think? Apparent or clear? Are they both biased? Is one of them biased? You can let me know after you watch this CNN 40-second clip from CNN State of the Union with Jake Tapper, starting off with, this is the very beginning that I like to show, where he says, what is the State of the Union this week? And this week, the State of the Union is in flux, for reasons Jake Tapper will explain here.
Jake Tapper in Washington, where the state of our union is in flux. Democrats' wounds still fresh from their crippling losses. Just elected a new chair of the Democratic National Committee in the hopes of attempting to rebuild their party. Former Labor Secretary Tom Perez won out over Bernie Sanders-backed Congressman Keith Ellison in what many saw as a proxy war between the Obama-Clinton wing of the party and the Sanders wing of the party. But the two men put on a clearly united front, with Ellison accepting Perez's offer to serve as deputy chair of the party, and both setting their sights squarely on President Trump. Senator Bernie Sanders will be here live with his reaction in just a few minutes. But first, let's get to the new boss himself.
And I will show a clip of Jake Tapper's interview with Thomas Perez in just a minute. But first, I want to show a clip from Todd's interview. Like I said, Thomas Perez was on a few different shows. His answers were pretty repetitive. But first, I want to show his answer to Chuck Todd doing what I said that NBC did a good job of being fair and balanced, talking about some of the weaknesses in the Democratic Party. Are they running that wood chipper again? Whatever. You think it's almost sunset. They got to stop with the wood chipper. But first they were like chopping down trees earlier, which is one of the reasons my show's so late. Sorry about that. But anyway, I want to get to the problems with the Democratic Party that the new DNC chair, Thomas Perez, reacting to Chuck Todd's questioning about that, and hopefully the wood chipper will not be going by the time we get back from this clip that we'll watch together here.
That you're in as a party, and the whole, which is surprising considering you had the White House for the last 8 years. Since 2008, here's the financial hole. The Republican National Committee has outraised the Democratic National Committee, with Barack Obama as the President of the United States and head of the Democratic Party, by over $200 million over that 8-year period. And then look at the results. You know them. A loss of 11 Senate seats over that time, 63 House seats, 12 governorships, and nearly 1,000 state legislative seats. I know you've been talking about this grassroots approach, but the fact is, this party got gutted while you had a Democrat in the White House.
Well, we have to rebuild our parties in the 50 states, in the territories, and that's exactly what we're going to do. We also have to redefine our mission. We not only elect the President of the United States, but we elect people from the school board to the Senate and everywhere in between, governors, secretaries of state, treasurers, attorneys general, and it started yesterday in Delaware, and I'm very excited about that. And I think there's an acute understanding that where we fell short is that we didn't invest enough in those state parties. When we lead with our values, and when we build that strong infrastructure, when we make house calls, when we're in every zip code, and I traveled 10 states over the last 5 days, Chuck, that's why my voice is scratchy. Right. And I heard from rural America that the Democratic Party hasn't been there for us recently. We have to make sure we have an every zip code strategy. That's how we win. That's exactly what we're going to do. These investments in grassroots organizing, because our values are the right values, but we've got to put those values into action.
I want to actually put up a quote that Howard Dean used during his presidential campaign, and some would argue that his tenure as chair of the Democratic Party is perhaps one of the most successful tenures in the modern history of the party. But he said this as a candidate: I still want to be the candidate for guys with Confederate flags in their pickup trucks. At the time, it was, we can't beat George Bush unless we appeal to a broad cross-section of Democrats. Just replace Bush with Trump, and that quote could be active today, that you've lost touch, whether it's rural America, whether it's, do you think you've lost touch culturally or economically or both?
Well, I think we have to underscore that economic message. In Ohio, I went out there, I talked to voters, and what they heard from Donald Trump is, I'm going to bring your coal jobs back. That's a lie. But what they heard is that he felt their pain. What they heard from us was that we vote for us because we're not him. And we have to make sure we're communicating our affirmative message. We stand for good wages. We stand for Social Security. We stand for retirement security. We brought this nation Medicare. The Republicans are trying to voucherize Medicare and privatize Social Security. Donald Trump wants to eliminate overtime pay for people. Donald Trump he doesn't care about raising the minimum wage. But we have to communicate these messages consistently in every zip code, because I learned in my trip across this country during this campaign that a lot of people do feel forgotten, and we will not allow that to happen. We will be in every zip code.
What is, though,
So we're going to be in every zip code. That was an answer I heard in a bunch of different places from Thomas Perez. Like I said, he was on a few different shows, and I didn't take the duplicative answers, but he definitely is committed to what Howard Dean used to call making the Democratic Party a 50-state party, which is really important, especially when there are a lot of states where they have votes in the Electoral College and in the Senate, but not that many people. The Democrats do well, where there are more people. The Republicans do well where there are a lot of open spaces with fewer people who seem to still get a lot of votes in the Electoral College and the U.S. Senate, but that's unfortunately the way things were set up in the Constitution of the United States. Speaking of which, for those of you who are fans of Sandy, I just posted on Instagram, LiberalViewer on Instagram, and also Facebook.com/LiberalViewer and Twitter.com/LiberalViewer should all have pictures of Sandy curled up with the U.S. Constitution right over on the floor there, which she did as she was just getting ready to watch the show, and now she's watching the show as my in-live studio audience here, in addition to the over 100 live viewers. I noticed, I've been watching your live comments. People are pretty skeptical about the Democratic Party now that the establishment candidate Tom Perez has won. Some people seem to think it's rigged, kind of like what Donald Trump tweeted, and I don't actually agree with Donald Trump. But those are the rules of the Democratic Party, and actually the next clip I want to show is Thomas Perez reacting to that tweet from Donald Trump about how the whole thing was rigged, and I think he actually goes off into this other topic that I'm going to cover about Russia, but I'll leave that for later in the show. But I do want to watch that clip of Thomas Perez. This is talking to CNN's Jake Tapper on State of the Union this morning. Clip number 7. Wait, no, that's the Bernie Sanders one. Sorry, clip number 6. Over here.
I want to ask you about a tweet from President Trump this morning about the DNC chair's race. He wrote, quote, "The race for DNC chairman was, of course, totally rigged. Bernie's guy, like Bernie himself, never had a chance. Clinton demanded." Perez, I wanted to give you an opportunity to respond.
Well, Congressman Ellison and I got a good kick out of that. Donald Trump up again in the morning, tweeting about us. Our unity as a party is our greatest strength, and it's his worst nightmare. And frankly, what we need to be looking at is whether this election was rigged by Donald Trump and his buddy Vladimir Putin. And I'll tell you, having Jeff Sessions oversee such an investigation, it's really unfair to any foxes across America to say that would be the fox guarding the hen house. We need an independent investigation, because that is a serious, serious issue. And the American people need to understand whether the Russians, in cahoots with the Trump folks and others, rigged the election. And when Sessions and Flynn are out there together campaigning, they clearly lack the authority and the objectivity to conduct that investigation. So we need an independent investigation.
All right, Chairman Perez, thank you so much, and congratulations, sir.
Great.
So I actually thought that was a good answer to the whole question about whether the DNC election was rigged, which it wasn't rigged. From the Donald Trump tweet saying that it was rigged, turning it around on him, talking about how the Russians actually tried to rig our election, and why won't he give the independent prosecutor, or tell Jeff Sessions to appoint an independent prosecutor. And that's a topic I'm going to get to in the last several clips I'm going to show you. including breaking news from a Republican congressman that happened on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher last Friday. But before I get to that, I want to show one clip that I thought sort of belied some of the unity talk that you saw there from Tom Perez, saying that he's going to work closely with Keith Ellison and there's no real split in the party. Well, here's Jake Tapper talking to Senator Bernie Sanders about whether he's going to give his list, all his small donors that his big email list that he created during the 2016 campaign. Apparently, he's not willing to just give the list over the Democratic National Committee. He's willing to use the list for certain Democratic candidates, but he wants to choose. He doesn't want the Democrats and the DNC, and I guess that means Thomas Perez. He doesn't want Thomas Perez to be the one choosing who gets to use his list. He gets to decide, as you can see in his answer to Jake Tapper on CNN's State of the Union this morning over here.
Because you have a massive email list that helped your presidential campaign raise $218 million online from 2.8 million donors. Are you going to give your list to the Democratic National Committee so that you can help them become more grassroots?
We are going to do everything that we can, and we have started that progress to transform the Democratic Party into a party that stands up for working families. And we have and we will strongly support those candidates who are going to take on the issues of income and wealth inequality. They're going to take on the greed of the pharmaceutical industry. Those people who want to make public colleges and universities tuition-free, who understand, unlike President Trump, that climate change is real and we've got to transform our energy system. So we're going to work to support progressives who are running for the Senate, who are running for the House, who are running, and Tom Perez made this point, for school board, for city council, for state legislature. I'm right now in Kansas. Last night, we had 5,000 people coming out in Topeka, Kansas. Kansas is not a Democratic stronghold, but we're beginning to see an activation here in Kansas and in states and communities all over this country, people who are prepared to take on Trump, people who are prepared to fight for progressive change.
That sounded like you were saying that you're going to keep your email list to support the candidates that you think are progressives, and you're not going to give it to the Democratic National Committee. Did I interpret that incorrectly?
Well, where we are right now is that we are going to support and have supported and will continue to support those candidates who have the guts to stand up for working families and take on the big money interests, the people around Donald Trump. You know, Jake, when you talk, when President Trump talks about being the party of working people, man, he has certainly put together an administration of working people. He has more billionaires, more millionaires in his cabinet and his administration, any president in history. He has appointed people who are going to decimate the needs of the elderly, the children, the sick, and the poor. So what we are going to do is support those candidates who have the guts to stand up to the 1% and fight for the 99%.
Okay, I think my interpretation was correct. But let's talk about that you're talking about right now. President Trump.
So there you see Senator Bernie Sanders. He didn't directly answer the question, but as Jake Tapper said, I think he pretty much did answer the question that he's going to keep that power. And I understand, because that's really his big power now, is the grassroots organization he created during the Democratic primaries, and it's a powerful tool that he can use now, and he doesn't want to turn it over to the Democrats. And I guess there are a lot of people in the Bernie Sanders wing who are upset. I was reading in the comment section, the live comments along the way. Here's one from Pixie Hacks, said, I don't know if you could read that. It was a little small, but they speak of unity and then they piss on progressives yet again, and they should just admit it and become Republicans already. I guess that's the establishment moderate wing of the Democratic Party, and as many of you know, I voted for Bernie Sanders in the primaries, not Hillary Clinton, and I probably would have been happier with Keith Ellison, but they're actually, by the end of the DNC conference that elected Thomas Perez, I don't think there was a lot of ideological difference between them, and there was a lot of acceptance from even the establishment candidates that they need to harness some of this activist energy that's going on, and that they also have to have this 50-state strategy. And You saw in that earlier ABC report, some of the people were chanting that they want the, to be responsible to voters, not to money, for the voters, not for money, or for the people, not for money. I think that was the chant. And that's something the Democratic Party has to stop being so beholden to big money. And so that's what's important about the Bernie Sanders wing winning over the establishment Obama-Clinton wing, which is who Thomas Perez represents. But, it's the guy just got elected head of the DNC. Let's see what he does, and then we can judge based on what he does, not so much what they say. Speaking of leadership for the Democratic Party, one person who was on NBC's Meet the Press was a Democratic governor, centrist. Chuck Todd was actually kind of playing him up as a possible presidential candidate in 2020. There was the governor's conference in Washington, D.C., so there were several governors on the show, and they all seemed to be sort of, especially the Democratic ones. There was Terry McAuliffe from Virginia was also seemed to be possibly positioning himself to run for president in 2020. And this governor of Colorado, Hickenlooper, is John Hickenlooper? I think so. John Hickenlooper, governor of Colorado, was on NBC's Meet the Press, and the one question where I thought he showed how he's definitely a centrist Democrat was when Chuck Todd asked him how he will resist the Trump administration when it comes to marijuana, since Colorado is famous for having recreational marijuana laws that, where it was one of the first states, Colorado and Washington. So here you can see he's definitely a centrist. He's just almost on board with recreational marijuana in Colorado, even though his voters are way ahead of him. And I'll discuss that with you after we watch that clip together here.
The governor of Colorado, so marijuana is going to now always be a question from a national reporter. Let me ask you this on the regulation side. The federal government has essentially never enforced the federal law, which has allowed Colorado to set up the recreational use business. There's a new attorney general. We know that Jeff Sessions, as a senator, was opposed to it. You're blessed as a governor to have senators from both parties. That's always a good thing, no matter who's in charge. What do you hear from your Republican colleagues about whether Jeff Sessions is going to basically enforce federal law and shut down recreational use marijuana businesses?
Well, first I opposed it, and most elected officials did, but our voters passed it 55-45. It's in our Constitution, right? I took a solemn oath to support our Constitution, so I am, and it's different. It's a sovereignty of the states have a sovereignty, just like the Indian tribes have a sovereignty, just like the federal government does. So it's an interesting.
You don't think it's clear that the federal government could stop you? Well, you don't think it's a clear-cut case?
Exactly. I don't think it is, and I think it's certainly never my choice to be in conflict with federal law. Let's make that clear. Okay. That being said, so Senator Gardner had talked to Mr. Sessions before he was confirmed, Senator Sessions at that point, and was led to believe that Senator Sessions said, enforcement of marijuana was not going to be their primary, it wasn't worth rising to the top and becoming a priority. And was the implication was, you don't go crazy on this. Now, obviously things might have changed and we have to see what happens, but I mean, there's over 60% of American people are now in a state where either medical or recreational marijuana is legalized. This has become one of the great social experiments of our time.
If this were put on a ballot today, I know you opposed it before. If it were put on a ballot today, would you now support it?
Boy, I'm getting close. I mean, I don't think I'm quite there yet, but we have made a lot of progress. We didn't see a spike in teenage use. If anything, it's come down in the last year, and we're getting anecdotal reports of less drug dealers. I mean, if you get rid of that black market, you've got tax revenues to deal with, addictions and some of the unintended consequences of legalized marijuana. Mm-hmm. Maybe this system is better than what was admittedly a pretty bad system to begin with.
All right, John Hickenlooper, Democratic governor from Colorado. Thanks for coming in. I know you're here for the big governor's meeting, so you got more meetings to go to.
I don't know. I don't know if I could support someone as a candidate for president who is like just coming to the realization, maybe the drug war wasn't such a good idea after all. Maybe he should read this book, The New Jim Crow, right there. That talks in to a great extent about how the drug war, not just a bad idea, but really, really harmful to many, many people for many, many years. And I don't know. I'm not excited about Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper as the standard bearer for my party, and that's not what's gonna energize the base, at least not based on that clip. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And before I leave the topic of resistance, I started this with a Bill Maher monologue clip. I'm going to end it with a Bill Maher monologue clip on the topic of that last clip. Basically what happened was Sean Spicer, the White House press secretary, contradicted what John Hickenlooper had heard, that marijuana enforcement wasn't going to be a priority. Well, he said, yeah, especially he said they weren't going to go after medical marijuana, but there might be stepped up enforcement for recreational marijuana. And so, of course, Bill Maher had to comment on that in his monologue, as I will discuss with you after we watch that clip together here.
And how about this? Future stroke victim Sean Spicer. Said we can look forward to greater enforcement of federal marijuana laws. No. That's too far. No way. No way I am doing these 4 years straight. You can have my multicolored skull bong when you pry it from my cold, dead hands. And wait. What happened to deconstruction of the administrative state? Oh, I guess that just applies to stoners. You know, in 1 week, they went after LGBT people, Mexicans, stoners. That's the entire population of Los Angeles.
So, yeah, that kind of shows where the heart of the resistance is going to be, and you see which issue, of course, gets Bill Maher all excited. And he was actually, earlier, was making, and also later in the show, had some not so great things to say about the fight for transgender student rights, that, oh, it's, you know, when he compared it to the people who are getting deported, the undocumented immigrants, where they're, you know, tearing families apart and sending, you know, mothers of children, you know, out of the country, and then one person, and then he compared that to people who, you know, they need help where they want to pee or something like that. And that I didn't think was that great a way of bringing together any sort of liberal coalition. But I guess the thing that's going to bring Bill Maher in is if they go after his marijuana rights in California. But I also thought that was kind of funny. That's why I really included that. And like I said, that's the last clip on the whole topic of the resistance to Donald Trump, although the next topic is kind of a resistance to Donald Trump. So the Donald Trump versus the press has been a continuing topic, and I have a few clips on that before I get to the Russia topic, which is, you know, Trump's ties to Russia. You know, Trump loves Vladimir Putin, or whatever you want to call that topic. It's been an ongoing topic for several weeks, and before I get to both topics, I want to sort of give this overview from NBC's Meet the Press. This is Chuck Todd did sort of this interesting story where he connected the attacks on the press with the stories about connections between the Trump campaign and the Trump administration and Russia, and kind of, well, you'll see, not kind of, actually explicitly argued in this news report here that Donald Trump is using attacks on the press to distract from the Russia story. And that's a 3-minute news analysis from Chuck Todd on Meet the Press that I will discuss with you. And this covers both the press and Russia. That's why I put it before both topics. And anyway, I'll discuss it with you after we watch it together here.
Reported ties he and his aides may or may not have with Russia. And whenever stories break on that subject, press bashing, which is always part of the president's arsenal, seems to escalate.
I'm against the people that make up stories and make up sources.
It's a tactic with a pattern. The president's attacks on the media repeatedly have directly followed reporting on Russia. On January 5th, NBC News reported on the intelligence community's report on Russian influence in the election. On January 6th, President-elect Trump tweeted, "I am asking the chairs of the House and Senate committees to investigate top-secret intelligence shared with NBC prior to me seeing it." On February 13th, 14th, and 15th, news outlets reported on Mr. Trump's ties to Russia. On February 16th, President Trump spent much of a 77-minute news conference attacking the press.
Russia is fake news. This is fake news put out by the media. The leaks are absolutely real. The news is fake.
On Thursday night, media outlets reported that White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus asked the FBI to publicly discredit a New York Times story on Russia after the FBI's deputy director reportedly told him it was overblown. On Friday, the president went after the press.
I want you all to know that we are fighting the fake news. It's fake, phony, fake.
But Trump administration officials acknowledged on Friday that White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus did ask FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe to push back against news stories about contacts between Trump aides and Russians during the campaign. Days earlier, Priebus had said this on Meet the Press.
I've talked to the top levels of the intelligence community, and they've assured me that that New York Times story was grossly overstated and inaccurate and totally wrong.
Later on Friday, the Washington Post quoted both House and Senate Intelligence Committee chairmen saying that administration officials also enlisted them in conversations with reporters, conversations that Priebus also mentioned on Meet the Press.
And in fact, Devin Nunes, who is the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, went on the record after he was informed by the FBI as to that story. And what did he say? He said it was total garbage.
The drip, drip, drip is making even some Republicans in Congress wary. On Friday, Republican Congressman Darrell Issa, who was narrowly reelected in a district Clinton won, said he is open to a special prosecutor to investigate Russian interference in the election.
You cannot have somebody, a friend of mine, Jeff Sessions, who was on the campaign and who was an appointee. You're going to need to use the special prosecutor's statute and office.
Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas.
So I'm actually going to show a much longer version of that Darrell Issa clip from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher last Friday. As I said, it was actually news broken on HBO rather than one of these other shows that this Republican congressman from California has come out for an independent prosecutor on the whole Russia topic. But the Russia topic was kind of secondary in that news report there. The main topic, I think, was a topic the press loves to cover, which is Donald Trump's attacks on the press, which is why they're so effective. And in a way, it almost, the story there from NBC's Meet the Press was, the story itself was evidence of the story, because they weren't reporting so much on the Russian part, they were reporting on the attacks on the press to cover up the Russian-Trump connection. And in doing so, they were kind of taking the bait, because the press can't really stop itself from reporting on attacks on the press, which is why Trump has so effectively used that tactic. But I wanted to use that report as an example of the press getting tough with the Trump presidency in some ways, that they're really showing up. I've shown several examples for the last few weeks of people calling lies, and calling out the multiple falsehoods and from the Trump administration. And Bill Maher actually took note of that in his New Rules segment at the end of the broadcast. You can actually watch the entire New Rules segment at a link I put in the video description to the Real Time channel on YouTube. Also, the entire Darrell Issa interview is available there. Everything but the monologue that I'm taking clips from, because I took 2 monologue clips, and then the one Darrell Issa clip that I will be showing, and then this clip, which is from the New Rules segment, where he talks about, first he gives some examples. If you've been watching my show every week, you will recognize the NBC Meet the Press clip and the ABC This Week clip that he starts off in the part that I'm showing. I'm not showing the entire New Rule. I'm showing 3 parts of it that I've sort of edited together to show the part where he's really talking about how the press has to step up and do its job. And he starts off with some good examples of them doing their job, and then ends with an important point about whether the news should be making profit or not, which I will talk about with you after we watch that 3-minute or so excerpt from the New Rule on Friday on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher here.
Chuck Todd had this moment with Kellyanne Conway.
4 of the 5 facts he uttered were just not true. Look, alternative facts are not facts. They're falsehoods.
And take a look at George Stephanopoulos kicking little Stephen Miller's balls up into his chest cavity.
You have provided zero evidence that the president's claim that he would have won the popular vote if 3 to 5 million illegal immigrants hadn't voted. Zero evidence for either one of those claims.
Well, it's
Thanks a lot for joining us this morning.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye. We're going to need a lot more of this. We are. The press, the free press that is enshrined in our Constitution. But for the press to be effective, these numbers have to change. Can you imagine how this must make a reporter feel? To be losing a truthfulness contest to Donald Trump? It's like losing a rap battle to Mitt Romney. Now, you can be mad at me for giving a platform to Milo, but Donald Trump is the apotheosis of the alt-right, and the media gave him the biggest platform ever. They covered every Trump rally like we put a game show host on the moon. They made him look like he was president before he was. Even during the primaries, Trump got 3 times the coverage of the entire rest of the field.
Bye-bye, bow-bow.
Okay, guys, for the sake of the Republic, you got to get serious again. You have to win your respect back. So Trump can't say, the people don't believe you, you're a joke. Look at what was on Time Magazine's website last week. These dads doing ballet with their daughters is the only thing you need to watch today. No, that's the definition of what I don't need to watch today. Henry Luce must be spinning in his grave, or as Time would put it, you won't believe what our founder is doing now. The news media lost trust because they became eyeball-chasing clickbait whores who bumped the story about climate change for the one about grizzly bears in the jacuzzi. You know, there is an answer to this. When TV started, there was an understanding between the folks who owned the airwaves, the American people, and the folks who made TV, the Jews. And that understanding was that the news wasn't supposed to make money. It was something the corporations gave us as a public service. CBS News is 3% of CBS's revenue. CNN, 4% of Time Warner's. ABC and NBC News are only 1.5% of Disney and Comcast. Guys, take one for the team. It's not that much. It'll pay off in the long run. You know why? Because the best customers are alive.
So yeah, I definitely agree with a lot of what Bill Maher said there, especially about the profit motive for the news divisions of these various networks. I am old enough, and one of the reasons I do this Sunday live clip roundup every Sunday is because I've been watching these Sunday morning news analysis shows from these big 5 corporate outlets. Well, Fox News didn't start till the 90s, but since like the early 1980s, since I was in high school, college, right around the end of high school, beginning of college, and I watched them pretty much every week. And it was right around that time, or after the first several years, that this whole idea of the news having to make a profit for the networks, that's when it started to seep in. And I've watched the change that Bill Maher is talking about, though. One thing he said that the news used the networks used to do the news as a non-profit type enterprise because they were doing it as a public service. Well, one thing he left out is they were doing it as a public service required in exchange for their license to use the public airwaves, which they get for way less than they get huge profit from getting to use this bandwidth. I mean, less than they used to. Now with cable and the internet, it's not as valuable as it used to be back in the 1980s when I started watching these news analysis shows. But they definitely were getting a huge a very valuable asset from the American people by getting to use the broadcast airwaves that were much narrower back in those days. There were a lot fewer outlets. And so in exchange for that, they were supposed to do certain things as a public service, and one of those was the news and hosting debates and stuff like, the whole giving us a civic, fourth estate or whatever you want to call it. But that responsibility has definitely given way to profit, and I think Bill Maher was right about that. And before I leave the whole topic of a free press and how the press has to be more robust in an era when they're being attacked so vociferously by Donald Trump, I want to show one more very brief clip from NBC's Meet the Press, where I noticed this is the first week for quite a while that no one from the Trump administration did like the full Ginsburg or went on all the shows except for CNN's State of the Union that they were boycotting. And actually the only person from the Trump administration who went on any of the shows was the deputy press secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who's former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee's daughter. And she is a fairly low official in the Trump administration, I guess, which is something that Chuck Todd explicitly complained about. And I guess this is part of how NBC's fighting back against Trump, as I will discuss with you after we watch that brief 20-second clip from NBC this morning here.
Before we get started, in case you're wondering, as we always do, we asked the White House for any of a number of senior officials to join us this morning, especially cabinet secretaries. We also asked for them. Ultimately, instead of suggesting a senior administration official or a cabinet secretary, the White House offered a deputy press secretary, and so we declined. Let me go to the...
So that's kind of like what Jake Tapper's been saying on CNN's State of the Union for several weeks about how they couldn't get, that they couldn't get anyone from the White House, and then they could only get Kellyanne Conway, and they weren't going to take her, and then they did. I don't know, but there was Chuck Todd on NBC this morning saying he wouldn't take the deputy press secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, but ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos took her, and I'm going to show a couple clips from her. The first, the one is later in the show when I get to the Russia topic. This is actually the last clip on the press topic where she answers a question that this was something I tweeted about, and I'll show my tweet in just a minute. I was really bummed out about this. I'm a big fan of the White House Correspondents' Dinner, where they have like a comedian come and make jokes that sometimes can be really amazing, an amazing way for a comedian to speak truth to power. And also then the president has to go up and make jokes about himself and about the press and about his opposition and show, some grace and good humor. And Donald Trump, I guess, can't do that because he's not going to the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And here's his deputy press secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, talking to George Stephanopoulos, trying to explain why he's not going to the White House Correspondents' Dinner in this clip.
Final question. We heard yesterday in the president's tweet he's not going to go to the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Why?
George, I think it's pretty safe to say I think we all spend enough time around each other as it is. But look, this wasn't a president who was elected to spend his time with reporters and celebrities. This was a president who campaigned on speaking directly to Americans, and that's exactly what he's going to spend his time doing. I think it's kind of naive of us to think that we can all walk into a room for a couple of hours and pretend that some of that tension isn't there. One of the things we say in the South, if a Girl Scout egged your house, would you buy cookies from her? I think that this is a pretty similar scenario. There's no reason for him to go in and sit and pretend like this is going to be just another Saturday night. I think he's very focused on protecting our borders, national security, growing our economy, and instead of going and spending the night doing that, I think he'll spend the night focused on what he can do to help better America.
Pretty straight answer. I think a lot would argue the eggs have gone both ways on that, but we're going to have to leave it there today. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, thanks very much. Let's bring...
And good for George Stephanopoulos at the end there for pointing out that the eggs have gone both ways between the press and Donald Trump, or that whole idea, you don't buy Girl Scout cookies from a Girl Scout who eggs your house. I've heard, that's an old saying I've heard. Has anyone Anyone ever heard that? I don't know. Maybe that's something from Arkansas. Anyone out there in Arkansas ever heard that you don't buy Girl Scout cookies from a Girl Scout who eggs your house? That seems to be like maybe. I do have the book Hillbilly Elegy. Is it here? Yeah, that's right here. Hillbilly Elegy, which is talking about how over in the hillbilly parts of the United States, which is he's more talking about Ohio and Kentucky, and West Virginia, but I guess there's some of that in Arkansas that people are really vindictive. So maybe there's a lot of house egging that goes on in Arkansas that by Girl Scouts that I'm not aware of, but you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. I also, if you don't follow me on Twitter, you can follow me on Twitter and retweet my criticism of Donald Trump, which this was just a few minutes after I saw his tweet here. You can see where he said, "I will not be attending the White House Correspondents Association dinner this year. Please wish everyone well and have a great evening." Well, I think this is definitely Trumple thin skin, and you see, I was looking forward to a good comedian speaking truth to real Donald Trump power. I guess our president doesn't like hearing truth. Well, that's the best I could do in 140 characters, and if you want to, I got one retweet and one like already, but if you want to go over to twitter.com/liberalviewer, you can retweet that, or I've actually put a link down in the video description directly to that tweet if you want to retweet that, and you can put your own comment on there too, and maybe you should mention that he's Trumple Thinskin. I should have put in hashtag Trumple Thinskin, but I was out of characters. Anyway, so that's the last clip I want to show on this whole press issue. But now I have 5 final clips I want to show on Donald Trump loves Putin, or the Donald Trump campaign /administration connection to Russia topic that keeps showing up almost every single week. And you already saw some of that previewed in the NBC story that was kind of overshadowed by the way Donald Trump always attacks the press after he is connected somehow with Russia. Well, like I said, the breaking news is this next clip I'm going to show, which is about a little over 2 minutes worth of the Darrell Issa interview on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, where he is kind of surprisingly, as a Republican, calling for an independent prosecutor, which is the way the law is set up. The Attorney General has to appoint an independent prosecutor. That's the only way it can happen. So it's up to Jefferson Beauregard Sessions, the former senator from Alabama, now Attorney General for Donald Trump. But Darrell Issa seems to recognize too easily almost that Jeff Sessions has a conflict, and I'll show you a little bit later. George Stephanopoulos will quote. Is it George Stephanopoulos? Or maybe it's on NBC's Meet the Press where they actually quote the law. No. It's it's on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos talking to Sarah Huckabee Sanders, which it'll be the next clip. But first I want to show Darrell Issa calling for this independent prosecutor. And I've watched this clip several times, and it eventually, I think the reason he's doing this is I have this feeling he may be running for governor as a Republican in California, and so he's trying to show his independence from Donald Trump. That's like the second or third time I watched this clip that kind of popped into my head. You can let me know what you think after you watch that clip here.
So anyway, all our intelligence agencies, you have great respect for them. You're a veteran, right? Okay. They all said that the Russians hacked one side, like a poker game, where just one player has the cards up. They just hacked the Democrats. And we know for a fact that people in the Trump administration had dealings and talks with the Russians during the campaign. Okay, so let's go back to 2012. Say the Russians hacked only Mitt Romney, and there's a lot of contact between the Obama administration and Russia. You'd have let that slide?
No.
So you're not going to let this slide?
No.
Oh, so you're going to ask for a subpoena, like Olivia Snow did?
We're going to ask the intelligence committees of the House and Senate to investigate within the special areas they can see.
Now, we need an independent prosecutor. And Jeff Sessions should recuse himself the same way Loretta Lynch recused herself, because he was part of the Trump campaign. Is that correct? Jeff Sessions should recuse himself?
As I was saying, number two would be, you're right, that you cannot have somebody, a friend of mine, Jeff Sessions, who was on the campaign and who was an appointee. You're going to need to use the special prosecutor's statute and office to take, not just to recuse, you can't just give it to your deputy, that's another political appointee. You do have to do that. We're going to have to do it, and here's the reason we're going to have to do it, Bill. There may or may not be fault, but the American people who are beginning to understand that Putin murders his enemies, sometimes right in front of the Kremlin, and then suddenly the cameras don't work there. He's murdered people and taken down using cyber warfare in Georgia and in Ukraine. This is a bad guy who murders people, who runs a gas station with an economy the size of Italy, but is screwing up things all over the world that we've been doing, quote, working with. Now, we have to work with them. We don't have to trust them. And we need to investigate their activities, and we need to do it because they are bad people.
Well, that's certainly not the opinion of the Trump administration. I thank you for saying it publicly.
So what do you think? You think Darrell Issa might be thinking of running for governor of California at some point? Is that why he just did that? In a different part of the interview, and by the way, the entire interview is available on the real-time channel on YouTube, which I put a link down in the video description to the real-time channel on YouTube. They have the Darrell Issa interview, and they have that whole New Rules segment that I took excerpts from. And in that, the rest of the interview, or maybe it wasn't in the interview, maybe it was when Darrell Issa was in was it in the overtime part? I think it might have been the overtime part, where he said that Darrell Issa is really rich and that Seth MacFarlane, who was another guest, was also really rich, and they were both like super rich, and they could have like a rich off. That was, I think that might have been in the overtime segment. And so Darrell Issa is really rich, and he's a longtime congressman. Where's he going to go next? I don't know, governor of California? There's a big opening for Republicans to run for. There are a couple Democrats already. Gavin Newsom, lieutenant governor, and also Antonio Villaraigosa. I can never pronounce his last name. Sorry about that. Former L.A. Mayor Villaraigosa. I think that's. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Anyway, you can let me know down in the comments. Let me know down in the comment section if I'm mispronouncing the name of that former L.A. mayor. But I want to move on to this next clip. I mentioned that George Stephanopoulos was going to sort of grill Sarah Huckabee Sanders on this whole independent prosecutor issue, and you'll see she kind of deflects and tries to say we have to move on, and says that, and she a few times says that if they, if Democrats want to like relive their loss of the election over and over again, she's like a mini Kellyanne. She's trying to be Kellyanne Conway, but I don't think she's doing that great a job. And partway through, you'll see George Stephanopoulos actually quotes the regulation as to when the Attorney General or anyone in the Justice Department is supposed to recuse themselves because they have a connection, a political connection to someone who's under investigation. And I will talk about that with you after we watch that. This is actually a 5-minute grilling of Sarah Huckabee Sanders by George Stephanopoulos on ABC this morning over here.
By headlines late this week for enlisting the FBI and intelligence officials to counter damaging stories and appearing to interfere with independent investigations. As the Veterans Group prepares to launch this new ad.
President Trump, the CIA and FBI both say Russia interfered with our election to help you. And we now know your campaign was in contact with them when it happened. So, sir, we're putting you on notice. We're demanding Speaker Ryan and Senator McConnell appoint an independent commission to get the answers, because defending America means finding the truth.
Let's get answers now from the White House. Sarah Huckabee Sanders joins us now. Sarah, thank you for joining us this morning. So you just saw that ad.
Thanks for being here. Good morning, George.
We also heard from a key Republican member of Congress this week, Darrell Issa, who said that the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, must recuse himself from this Russia investigation. Let's listen.
You cannot have somebody, a friend of mine, Jeff Sessions, who was on the campaign and who is an appointee. You're going to need to use the special prosecutor's statute and office to take, not just to recuse. You can't just give it to your deputy. That's another political appointee.
That is a senior Republican, Congressman. What's your response?
Look, I think the real easy answer here is that the FBI has already said this story is BS. Those are their words, so I apologize to my mom. But literally, those are the words of the FBI, that this story is BS. They came to us. They approached us. We're putting that story out there. I think the American people deserve to know the truth, and that's exactly what it is, that there's nothing here. Just because reporters say something over and over and over again doesn't start to make it true. At some point, we get to a place where we've got to move on and start focusing on the things that the American people care about, and I don't think this is it. We've talked about it time and time and time again, asked and answered. Let's move forward. Let's start talking about the economy. Let's talk about education. Let's talk about border security. Let's talk about national security. That's what's keeping most Americans up at night. That's what they want us focused on, and that's what this administration is doing day in and day out.
A couple of things there. First of all, the FBI has made officially no comment. The FBI director, James Comey, has had no comment. You're saying that the FBI told you that it was BS. The FBI hasn't said that at all, but I was asking a different question. The FBI investigation is continuing right now. The intelligence committees are continuing their investigations right now, and the question at hand is it appropriate for the Attorney General to oversee that investigation? Here are the Justice Department guidelines. They say that no DOJ employee may participate in a criminal investigation or prosecution if he has a personal or political relationship with any person or organization substantially involved in the conduct that is the subject of the investigation. How can it be appropriate for a key member of the Trump campaign to oversee an investigation into the Trump campaign?
Look, George, we're confident whatever review that Congress wants to do, I think that's the first step. If they want to take that on, which there are 2 committees that are currently doing that, we're extremely confident that whatever review, they're all going to come to the same conclusion, that we had no involvement in this. The bigger thing here is if Democrats want to continue to relive their loss every single day by doing investigation or review after review, that's fine by us. We know why we won this race. It's because we had the better candidate with the better message. They didn't campaign in the right places. They didn't have a good candidate. And if they want to continue to relive that loss every single day, then we welcome that.
That wasn't a Democrat. That was a Republican member of Congress. So just say that for the record. And I'll take your answer to say you don't believe that the Attorney General needs to recuse right now. On the investigations, though, you also saw Republican members of Congress.
I don't think we're there
Hold on,
yet.
let me finish the question right there.
Yes, sir.
You saw Republican members of Congress say this week that President Trump should release his tax returns. Senator Collins said that it may come to subpoenaing these tax returns. If Congress requests these tax returns as part of the investigation, will President Trump provide them?
Look, that's a question you'd have to ask the president. But what I do know is that, again, we've answered this question. I guess I don't know how many times you have to answer the same question and people start to expect a different answer. Again, I wasn't saying that he shouldn't recuse himself or that he should. My point is I don't think we're there yet. Let's work through this process. You guys want to jump to the very end of the line. That's not how this works. Typically, you go through a congressional oversight review. We're doing that. Let's not go to the very end of the extreme. Let's let this play out the way that it should. But again, I go back to, if you guys want to continue to relive this loss, then let's do that. But at the same time, while the Democrats and even maybe some of the Republicans, as you mentioned, want to talk about that, what we're focused on in this administration is what we campaigned on and achieving those goals and making sure that America is moving forward.
Again, I was asking about the FBI and the Justice Department investigation, not the congressional. But let's move on to the State of the Union. One of the big questions is...
So I think George Stephanopoulos, as I said before, I showed the clip, did a pretty good job of grilling Sarah Huckabee Sanders on the whole independent prosecutor issue and even sticking in the whole tax return issue. And there was a good introductory part there about the Russia-Trump connection also, I thought. I wonder, though, whether after watching that clip and the other Sarah Huckabee Sanders clip I showed, what you think of Chuck Todd's decision or NBC's Meet the Press's decision that Chuck Todd talked about, where they said they asked for someone from the administration and the only person they got offered was Sarah Huckabee Sanders, so they said thanks but no thanks. And after you see those clips from George Stephanopoulos, do you think it's worth getting Sarah Huckabee Sanders, or should they say no one from the administration if you're just going to give us someone? I mean, her answers, she wasn't as well versed as Reince Priebus, or I guess they were asking for cabinet secretaries, or Steve Bannon never goes on, or Kellyanne Conway, even Sean Spicer, and then Stephen Miller. We saw him one week, and they haven't turned him out again after he said the president's power shall not be questioned, or he was like, it was almost like that part in Dr. Strangelove where he's like stopping his hand from going. I don't know. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but the one thing when George Stephanopoulos was asking about the tax return, you notice she said, well, that's something you'd have to ask the president. Well, the president sent you here to answer the questions, so maybe you should give a better answer than that. But anyway, I want to move on to a few more clips on this Russia-Trump connection. The first clip I want to show is Chuck Todd questioning Senator Tom Cotton, who's on the Intelligence Committee, a Republican, about whether there should be an independent prosecutor, and he has a kind of vague answer, kind of like what you heard from Sarah Huckabee Sanders, although I think Chuck Todd has a really good follow-up question loaded up here, which I won't give away. I'll talk about after we watch that clip together over here.
I want to ask you about the Darrell Issa being open to a special prosecutor. At what point is it in the best interest of the country to sort of take it away from elected partisans at this point, whether it's a commission, I know a select commission, outside commission, or a special prosecutor? Where are you in that?
Well, I think that's way getting ahead of ourselves here, Chuck. There's no allegations of any crime occurring. There's not even an indication that there's criminal investigations underway by the FBI, as opposed to counterintelligence investigations, which the FBI conducts all the time as our main counterintelligence bureau. If we get down that road, that's a decision that Attorney General Sessions can make at the time. But I think
Senators
that's very
can
far
call
down
for it on their own. I mean, you called during your campaign against Mark Pryor, you called for a special prosecutor for the IRS. How does this Russia allegation, when does that rise to that level in your mind?
Well, I think that's far down the road from what our inquiry might reveal in the Intelligence Committee or what the FBI's inquiries might reveal. That's something that can be decided down the road. But right now, there's no credible evidence of these contacts beyond anonymous sources in the media. And I've got to tell you, anonymous sources can't always be trusted.
Anonymous sources are how we found out about a lot of scandal in this country.
Anonymous sources says Steve Bannon drove from the White House to the Department of Homeland Security to confront John Kelly, which we now know is not the truth. That's not like the tone of a conversation. That is someone's physical whereabouts. You cannot credit stories that are based on anonymous sources. You should look into them, especially if you're in a position of responsibility, but you can't simply credit them.
Let me talk to you about health care.
So one positive that I mentioned before I showed the clip is that Chuck Todd there had this follow-up question all loaded up about how Senator Tom Cotton had called for a special prosecutor when he was running for Senate, regarding the IRS scandal. So if he can call for a special prosecutor in the Obama administration, he doesn't have to wait for Jeff Sessions, because the Attorney General is the only one who can appoint a special prosecutor. There used to be this law where there was like a multi-judge commission that appointed special prosecutors in certain situations. That was back when Ken Starr was investigating the Clintons, and then that law expired, and there were some constitutional questions about whether that was even legal. But now it's actually just up to the Attorney General, and so I thought that Chuck Todd did a good job of having that follow-up question ready. But then I thought that Chuck Todd, it was kind of funny that, remember I showed in the press, or at the very beginning of the whole press topic and Russia topic, I showed that NBC Meet the Press analysis where they said every time Donald Trump brings up, or every time the press brings up Donald Trump's connection to Russia, Trump starts attacking the press to make us, to distract us from the whole Russia issue. Well, you notice at the end of that clip, Senator Tom Cotton actually started attacking the press for using anonymous sources, and Chuck Todd got distracted by it and started talking about that instead of the whole Russia connection. It was like Tom Cotton was doing exactly what Chuck Todd was warning about, but he still couldn't stop from taking the bait at the end of that last clip there. But or I don't know, am I overanalyzing that? You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. But before I leave Senator Tom Cotton's interview, I want to show one more clip of that where he talks about these contacts between the Chief of Staff Reince Priebus and the head of the FBI, or the deputy head of the FBI, where they were trying to knock down this story from the New York Times about constant contacts between the Trump administration and Russian intelligence officials. And you saw last week Reince Priebus came on and said that, I've talked to high-level intelligence people and they tell me that it's all BS, and, that it's, there's nothing to the story, it's overblown. And, well, apparently there was some contact between the FBI and this deputy director and Reince Priebus that was initiated by the FBI guy, but then Reince Priebus asked him to try to go to the press and knock down the story, and he said he couldn't do that. But you'll see when Tom Cotton talks about it in this next clip, he kind of reverses that, where instead of, where he says to do it, and then the FBI, well, I'll explain it after we watch the Tom Cotton clip, what I'm talking about over here.
Action. Are you concerned about the White House contacts with, in particular, the FBI and the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, since your committee has already announced it's investigating all of these allegations of Russian interference in the election? Do you think that contact was inappropriate?
Well, Chuck, let's step back. Russia is not our friend. Vladimir Putin is KGB, always has been. The Senate Intelligence Committee, for as long as I've been on it, has been examining Russia's attempts to undermine faith in our electoral process and undermine our interest around the world. We have said that we're going to undertake in a bipartisan fashion an inquiry into everything that Russia tried to do in our election process last year. If that leads to potential contacts between Trump associates and the Russian government, then we'll explore those as well. One of the last things I did the week before last, before I left for home from Washington, D.C., was have an hours-long hearing on these very matters. So I'm confident that we're going to proceed in a manner that goes wherever the facts take us. But what you're talking about is what Reince Priebus just said on your show last week. This is not something that the White House has tried to conceal, and if anything...
Well, it doesn't matter whether it's concealed. Is it appropriate, though?
So, Chuck, let's take that CNN article on face value. I'm not going to confirm or deny, obviously, anything in these stories, because these leaks of classified information could do real harm to our national security, but just take it at face value. So it says that the FBI went to President Trump and Reince Priebus and said that reports of contacts between Trump associates last year and Russian intelligence officials were grossly overstated. Isn't it reasonable for the Chief of Staff to then say to the FBI director, well, are you going to say anything to correct the record on this, since everyone is running around Washington making these allegations? I think that's a perfectly reasonable response. Now, the FBI and other intelligence agencies have reasons that they don't go out and call balls and strikes on news stories, because we don't want to let our adversaries know what we do know or what we don't know, or how we know it. But again, if you just take everything in that story in face value, I don't think there's that much alarming in it.
But let's go to the issue of the White House.
So you see Senator Tom Cotton in the clip phrase it as Reince Priebus saying, well, are you going to say anything to the press, rather than saying, I want you to say something to the press. Will you say this to the press? Not, are you going? That's the way it was reported. And I've seen Fox News has this whole story sort of backwards, where they're playing down the whole thing, where they say it's not about the story and there's no sort of interference, but it's actually at least improper. And I mean, I guess I can't immediately think of why it's illegal, but the Attorney General is supposed to be independent, and the FBI under the Attorney General is supposed to be especially independent when they're investigating people in the administration. It just all shows why there should be a special prosecutor, but only Jeff Sessions can appoint a special prosecutor. So I wanted to make that point from showing that last Senator Tom Cotton clip. And, you know, he talked about how it's really bad that people are leaking this information about conversations between people in the administration, between Reince Priebus and this deputy FBI director. But conversations between people, when that gets leaked, that's not classified information, which is one point in that the former director of the CIA, John Brennan, makes in this next clip about the difference between actual classified information and then leaks about what people are talking about in the White House. But what's also really important about this clip is last week on CBS's Face the Nation, John Dickerson had the head of the House Intelligence Committee, Devin Nunes, and I showed a clip from that interview where I said it sounded like he was accusing former CIA Director John Brennan of being the big leaker, the holdover from the Obama administration that was leaking all this Russia information, which you'll see John Brennan, excuse me, specifically denies in this final clip from the broadcast tonight over here.
Intelligence Chairman Devin Nunes last week, and I want to play something that he said and get your reaction to it.
What we have is we do have people in the last administration, people who have burrowed in, perhaps all throughout the government, who clearly are leaking to the press.
So what's your reaction to that? We were talking about leaks of sensitive information from Obama administration officials.
Well, I think it's very unhelpful to make allegations about who is responsible for these leaks. And I think we have to distinguish between leaks of classified information, which is against the law, and leaks of discussions that might be taking place within the administration. And as far as leaks of classified information are concerned, I agree that they're appalling and they need to be investigated, they need to stop, because the impact on our collection systems and our capabilities can be grave. So I do think it's important to be able to stop those leaks, but the information could be coming from any number of quarters, whether it be intelligence community, White House, Congress, because a lot of people have access to this information.
One of the things that Chairman Nunes said is that, particularly with respect to National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, he said there's no way anybody would know about phone conversations he had with the Russian ambassador unless they were at the very highest levels of a previous administration, and that's why he was pointing to previous administration officials. Does that make sense to you?
Well, again, until there's an investigation in terms of who had access to this information, how it might have been shared beyond the senior-most circle of individuals, I do think it is premature to be pointing fingers at anybody, whether in this administration or the previous administration, who may have been responsible for those leaks.
I want to switch to the topic. I should ask you, have you talked to anybody in the press since leaving?
No, I have not. You're the first one that I've talked to in the press.
Meaning on, off the record, or any of that?
That's correct, yes.
Let's go to North Korea.
Which is why, as people point fingers about leaks, I certainly welcome that investigation to stop those leaks, because they shouldn't be taking place, and anybody who thinks I'm responsible for that is dead wrong.
If you were still director of the CIA, what would keep you up?
So you see, John Dickerson was ready to go on to North Korea there, and he I actually edited two clips together there because I wanted to emphasize what John Brennan was reacting to, which there was actually a tweet, I think, from Donald Trump a while back accusing John Brennan specifically of maybe being the leaker of some of this information about the Trump administration's connection to Russia. And there you can say he's saying he's not the leaker. So that's why I wanted to include that clip. I hope you appreciate all the clips I picked out for you, the 18 clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows. That's the show for tonight. If you want to help support the show, you can go to that tweet down in the video description. You can go and retweet or quote tweet that tweet that I criticized Donald Trump for not going to the White House Correspondents' Dinner. I already liked a couple people who quote tweeted it. A couple of them were there was even a Trumple Thin-Skin hashtag. So that was cool. Or you can support my show financially by becoming one of my patrons at that link down to Patreon down below in the video description. Or there's a little I here in the corner, or there will be for the recorded show, where you can become one of my direct fan funding patrons on YouTube. Or just give a thumbs up down there, put your supportive comment. I've been getting a lot of supportive comments lately. I appreciate all of that, and I may or may not have time to make an edited, produced video this week. I didn't last week, unlike the previous couple weeks, but until next, I will be back next Sunday, hopefully a little bit earlier, and I did start right on time this week. I hope you appreciate that. Hopefully there won't be the ambient or outside noise that I guess none of you could hear but me, but that's good news anyway. And anyway, until next week, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.